Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board on the 20th of February, 2024. I'd like to call this meeting to order, acknowledging that this meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin territory. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Algonquin nations for their stewardship of these lands since time immemorial. In accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, does any board member have any conflict of interest to declare? Seeing none. Do we have a mover for the agenda? I see Trustee Aziz. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, all in favor of the agenda as presented, and that passes. There are no delegations this evening, which takes us to item 6. I'm going to call on Director Buffoni to introduce Report 24-039.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd like to turn it over to our Associate Director, Giroir, to provide an overview of the budgetary process.
Through you, Chair, I'll get the presentation up. All right, so we're here to talk about the budget process for the 24-25 budget. Next slide. So the first piece of the budget is the compliance piece. So prior to the start of each year, compliance with the Education Act requires the board to approve a budget before the end of June. And planning for the 24-25 fiscal year has already commenced within our district. However, preliminary guidance from the Ministry of Education has not yet been received. District staff do anticipate, though, that we should have no problem as a board presenting you a budget and meeting the timelines from the ministry. Next slide. So here's the proposed budget schedule, and this is just the schedule, the bare bones schedule of what has already taken place and what is at the bare bones needed to be done. Certainly, any one of these meetings might add different agenda items at the discretion of the board and as requested by the trustees. But here's the basic layout of how we see the budget schedule progressing through the year. Next slide. So just a few budget development considerations. The school board recently released a 5-year strategic plan. Therefore, any new investments that we do make within the board should advance the board's updated strategic priorities of learning, well-being, and social responsibility. The provincial funding model is expected to be status quo. We haven't gotten any indication that we will receive new funding, and we are a little bit concerned that the provincial funding might not address all the inflationary pressures. Using all the current available information, the planning staff are currently forecasting enrollment to remain steady with no significant growth in 2025. There will be an opportunity to adjust this through the budget process, but we'll have to wait until we receive any different indicators than we've received so far. The board is in a vulnerable position with no additional or extra resources to deal with unexpected expenses. And although additional resources are not expected, there are many ways to advance the work of the strategic plan within the available resources that we have. Next slide. So next steps. The approval of the academic staffing, which you'll receive tonight, is a big first step in the process. We're a long way away, though, even after the approval of the academic staffing to a recommended budget. So there's a lot of work still to be done. It will be key for the budget process to understand the resources available to the ministry. So until we get a sense from the ministry on how big the bucket is to fit the program in and what types of priorities, PP grants and things like that we have, it's very difficult for us to identify key areas of growth and how the staff recommended budget will play out. But I think we can do the work to at least prioritize the needs as best we can, and in the interim until we receive that information. It'll also be key for more time to pass so we understand our current fiscal year. So as you know, we passed a balanced budget this year, and we're still in that post-pandemic period where expenses are starting to stabilize a bit. So until more of this year plays out, we won't really have as strong of an ability to forecast what next year might look like as far as pressures and expenses go. So those are key components to putting a recommended budget to the board for consideration. Next steps. or next questions. So I guess I'll start by opening it up here for questions, and then after that, we can go into the needs analysis piece.
Thank you. I see no questions and we have no online questions, so you may proceed.
Okay, so next slide. So these were the areas that the board identified as for the needs analysis to be considered through the budget process. As you can see in the report that I presented earlier, one of the appendices was the advisory committee bulletins that the advisory committee worked on, and those fall into the needs analysis pieces. But next slide. We did commit to providing you a bit more information on each one of those as part of this process. So I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about transportation. That was one of the areas that you identified. And so when we look at this fiscal year, the ministry funding had a shortfall of about probably $7 million if you had factored in OSTA providing us 100% of the service that that we would like to get from OSTA. But the reality is that when you consider in driver shortages and routes that and the vendor that didn't sign with us and some of the other considerations, we have about a $3 million shortfall as it stands now with OSTA. And we project even next year, if all things remain stable, there will be some inflationary pressures on the contracts and things like that. But we do project that we could have somewhere in the $6 million range of pressure to consider as part of the staff recommended budget. As I mentioned, inflation with the new contracts will continue to put pressure on the service, just the same level of service that we're providing now. We do hope that increased eligibility will also not be funded. So the way the ministry worked with the funding formula is they gave us a set amount of funding. And they said that this is the funding that you're going to get with what they call transitionary funding until the next 4 years. So even if our board had growth or if we have increased eligibility for ridership, that won't necessarily be funded by any more additional dollars from the ministry. And the funding formula continues to mature, but leaves gaps in the resources. So we know what we're spending on some of our contracts is less than what we're anticipated to receive from the ministry, which is why we have that funding shortfall pressure. They have committed to looking at the funding formula in many different areas, in particular van usage, but they haven't committed to necessarily fully funding those areas either. And then from a needs perspective, OSTA needs increased capacity to our students. So that's definitely an area where OSTA needs to improve. We tried to bring a new entrant into the market, but the reality is that the cost of bringing a new entrant to the market would be unsustainable for us under the current funding formula model, because the rates that they would want to operate in our area are just greater than the funding formula provides for. But vendor stability is a critical component in safe, reliable transportation. So we do need to help the third-party vendors in stabilizing their driver pools so that they can provide us that safe and stable transportation environment for our students. So opportunities, there's definitely opportunities. The bell time review may offer opportunities for efficiencies. We may need to look at eligibility standards within the two boards because they're not aligned right now. Program review could also offer up efficiency opportunities, as we know that we do drive kids sometimes past their nearest community school. The delivery model change within OSTA could help shift from small vans to small yellows, which would be a significant cost saver for us because they are very expensive. But again, that does take time and funding to implement. And we do anticipate that there will be some recommendations from the Deloitte report that could offer some understanding from the ministry on some of the issues that we're facing. And maybe that might help with funding and changes to the funding formula. So I'd like to stop it there and see if there's any questions or.
Trustee Nash?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair. Just looking at the opportunities, I mean, you know, when you decide to change bell times or even eligibility standards, program review, those are big decisions. And I don't expect that this would happen from here to September. So as I say, I don't see too many opportunities there. for any, I mean, realistically, that we'll be able to meet our budget requirements there.
Through you, Chair, I do agree that those are not decisions that would happen during the 24-25 budget, but we do have a 4-year window with transitionary funding that we're receiving now as part of the funding, or the way the ministry plans on funding transportation moving forward. And even if we don't make those savings during the next budget, at least we can commit to the work to finding ways to create those efficiencies for the future of transportation services. So we might not get the bell time reviews done, but even we could start a segment or make a commitment to start at the following year, because I do agree that these are not simple changes, and the decisions that are going to have to be made to solve some of the transportation problems or the funding problems. Because if not, like I said, there's about a $6 million pressure, and that's not even funding all the services that we need. And then if you take away the transitionary funding of another $14 million, we could be $20 million that we would be expected to subsidize from our GSM, which literally doesn't exist under the current construct.
And through you, Chair, may I have an additional question with regards to the Deloitte report, and when do we expect that?
So the Deloitte report hasn't been finalized. I know the ministry received an advanced copy of that report, and we're working with Deloitte on some of the findings that they made. They actually reached out to OSTA as well to get some confirmation of some of the numbers. I'm not sure how the ministry plans to distribute that report, of whether it'll be a public report, whether it'll be shared with OSTA in confidence, or whether it'll be something that we're allowed to share with the boards. I think that's under the purview of the ministry, but obviously if they expect us to implement some of the recommendations, they need to allow us to share the report. So I can't answer that question on when, but I do expect that within the next month, they should be finalizing that report, and we should have more information.
Okay, Trustee Scott.
Thank you for the presentation. 2 quick questions. First, in terms of the ministry funding that's showing on this slide as $48.8 million, is that including or not including the transitional funding?
That's including the transitional funding.
That is including. Thank you. And the other question is, in terms of looking at eligibility standards, I know that OSTA and our 2 boards managed to arrive on a common landing place for distance eligibility. What other kinds of eligibility standards would differ between the 2 boards?
I think that what vehicles that they use as far as providing support to some of their students might be an area for standardization. I think there are some areas under the compassionate realm that could use some considerations for standards. I think there are some areas within the specialized transportation requirements that are totally different in what one board does versus another board does. So I think there's lots of areas to review for standardization.
Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Kaplan-Murphy.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the projected shortfalls in transportation, and then the other areas that we're going to discuss this evening, that we also put forward the briefs in terms of our advocacy committee. Given that the district is already under scrutiny or under supervision due to our financial health, what will this mean? What will this mean to our likelihood of being able to, for example, support mental health, or support, increasing EAs or other non-academic staffing and non-transportation issues? Like, if you just said here in this table for transportation, 6 million, but we could be 20 million shortfall. So, and there are certain things like academic staffing that's already prescribed, and so we can't adjust that. Where are we going to find the funds realistically you say that, you know, there are ways to make sure that we're meeting what we've set out in our strategic plan, but where are we going to find the funds if we're already under supervision and we're already projecting such a shortfall, even just for transportation?
Through you, Chair. So not all investments in supporting strategic plan require additional human resources or funding. A lot of times it's like equity. It's just changing the lens that you're operating under and ensuring that you're using that lens in all the different processes. For example, if you teach a recruitment officer on how to use the equity lens, you're advancing the equity activity without actually investing any additional resources, as long as, you know, so there's many different ways that we could do things like that within the resources that we have. The reality is we don't know how big the bucket's going to be as far as when the technical papers are released and what maneuver room we might have to add additional investments. And until we know that, then it's really difficult to say whether or not there is rooms for growth in supporting our strategic initiatives. But the way the current environment is, I don't think we can anticipate additional funds to move all of our priorities forward with more staffing and more with extra funding. I don't think that's a realistic expectation, given the fact that the ministry has not indicated to us in any way that there's additional funding coming this year. And reality, they purposely envelope certain portions of the program so that we don't have the flexibility to change the way we invest in education. They want our dollars invested in certain ways, and that's why they make it the way they do.
Oh, okay. So just to I guess the next question then is, are other districts in the same situation? Are they also under supervision because of their financial health, or is there something specific to the OCDSB that has left us with larger shortfalls?
Through you, Chair, I don't know how many other boards are under ministry supervision, but I would say not very many. We are an outlier when it comes to that. 70% of the boards out there are running deficit budgets because they do have accumulated surpluses to kind of weather these, what I would call, hard times. But the reality is that because we have under, and I'm not sure the exact percentage, but because we have under at least 1% of accumulated surplus or unencumbered surplus in relative to our operating budget, that's why we're under supervision. Is it 1% or 2%? I can't remember. 2% is, so 2% is the recommended standard to not be under ministry supervision, and because we had two deficits in a row and we don't have the 2%, we are under supervision. So we are definitely an outlier.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Trustee Jennings.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report this evening and answering some difficult questions. You know, OC Transpo has been in the news a lot lately, and they're looking at a 10-year before things will change for them. I wonder if is it possible for us to change our partnership in some way? I know we already rely on them heavily for our secondary students. Is that something that's possible to relook at our partnership with OC Transpo?
Through you, Chair, I didn't put it down as an opportunity, but it is absolutely on my list of leveraging a relationship that we currently have, that maybe there might be room to leverage in helping provide us some stability and them some stability, because why would we pay a third-party vendor X dollars to provide us a service when maybe because of the loss of ridership that they had because of the way COVID has impacted the downtown core, there might be ways for us to find some synergies there. They've definitely expressed support for us in the way they prioritize the routes now to transport our students. But that does come with risk, right? When you have less control over OC Transpo than you do over a third party that you're paying money to provide you a certain level of service when it comes to safety and other things that some of our students have experienced in OC Transpo. So it may not be the be all end all solution to our problem, but I do think that there is an opportunity there. In particular, I'd be really interested in certain segments of our students potentially getting some support from that, but it's a little premature and it's not necessarily our board's decision to make that. It's going to have to be done in conjunction with the Catholic board and through the OSTA board. But I absolutely have some ideas for sure, and we'll be championing some of those ideas for investigation. But again, none of these things are going to happen quickly within, these are big decisions and are going to take time to work through with the city and to come to fruition for us.
And thank you. Just one more question. I think you have written there, just for the, where a student lives, the proximity to the school. Did you say that may be adjusted so that?
Not necessarily talking about any adjustments to any of the standards that we set as far as how far they live from the schools. It is certainly an area that we could generate efficiency. I think other school boards across the province have done things like that to find savings in their transportation budget. So I'm not saying it's off the table, but it's not something that we're particularly looking at right now as fine. I think right now, the goal has been over the past couple of months is to stabilize OSTA's organization and to implement some new ideas to see if they could take hold, to replace the interim GM with a more permanent solution and give that individual the opportunity to lead some of the change that we expect. I think it would be premature for us to make all the decisions and then just have someone show up and have to implement all those ideas. We're actively seeking someone with transportation experience who can bring some new ideas and help make the organization more efficient. And we have to give them the opportunity to apply those skills and experience to do that, right? So I think it's a combination.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay. Trustee Milburn.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. So I do have two quick questions that are more on the needs analysis at large. I am noticing in the budget process, and I'm sorry, I didn't bring it up under that section of slides, but under the budget process for the next few months, I don't see the rest of the needs analysis and when we expect them to come to this committee. Do we have an estimated time frame, or are we still working out time frame?
Through you, Chair. So any one of those scheduled meetings, I think, could easily include needs analysis. The only reason why I didn't put them in there is because that's just what we need to do to pass, like that's the bare bones schedule. But as I mentioned, I think every one of them might absolutely have some component of needs analysis discussion in them. And as we work through the needs analysis, it's one of the reasons why I put this slide in here today to kind of frame the needs analysis discussion around transportation to see where we still have more room to discuss what more would you guys like to see in that needs analysis of transportation. I'd really like to hear your feedback so that we can have the discussions that you guys want to have around those areas.
All right, thank you. And through you, Chair, although I cannot comment specifically on this slide, this is a fantastic start for a needs analysis. So thank you. My other question is, I did hear in previous questions that we were talking about being under supervision. I thought the report said we were under scrutiny from the ministry and not under supervision. Am I misunderstanding, or can you?
We are 100% under ministry.
We are under supervision.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
So that entails a bunch of things. It entails a lot of additional staff work, monthly reporting to the ministry on our expenditures. It's not an easy and light process. It puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the finance staff to comply with the ministry requirements while we're under supervision. And it's not something that we received additional staff to do. So it does take away from our ability to do other things like the needs analysis and other parts of the job that we try to do to make this organization more accountable and transparent. In particular, aligning expenses with budgets and implementing changes in policies and procedures. There's a lot of things that we're trying to do with acquisition cards and different components of our organization so that we can be more, we can have better data and information to make better decisions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that. That's all my questions. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Warner.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm going to defer to my alternate, Mr. Wong. He has experience with transportation planning, and he has a rather unexpected question to ask, and I can't answer it whispering to him. So I'm going to ask Tony, carry on.
For stuff for planning of routes, it may be old school, but at the same time, new school is logistics route planning. In terms of, it goes back to early days of train routing. There's universities with professors and third-party companies that do this in terms of optimization of routes. And it goes to a lot of mathematics, doctoral level types of mathematical analysis. Even I believe Deloitte has specialty departments that do this. And it ekes out the very last dime to basically get the most out of efficiencies and efficacy out of routing. And there's, I believe, these days now with AI availability, gets even more powerful. And so that could be a level, the software that they're using might be already generations behind, though it might have been at one time very efficient. So it might be something that could be looked at, whether that routing software could be looked at in a new generation to come. And that you might be able to get another 10%. 10% can make a big difference. Could be 20, could be 30% for all one know. And it could even improve safety. So those something that could be looked at. And if one step further, and that wouldn't be overnight, it may be looking at seeing how from that perspective, combining both all four boards together and generating much larger scales of economy and in many different ways of those economies, bringing together all four boards together and logistically what those possibilities are in many different angles. So.
Through you, Chair, I do want to just acknowledge that OSTA did go through a route efficiency study directed by the ministry, and it was multiple boards that went through that study. And we actually are fairly efficient in the way we route. And they do have a third party bus planner. I think Bus Planner is the name of the company that we use to do routing simulations and whatnot. There's definitely some room for improvements, but sometimes it's not as simple as okay, well then just change the bell time of that school for us, right? Like if we change the bell time of that school, then we could get another 50 kids on a bus, right? That's part of the complexity of this organization, and that we do transfer children vice materials and things like that require a different level of care, have to be at school at certain times and things like that. So I do hear what you're saying, and I'm not saying there's not efficiencies to be had with a third party. I think Deloitte was specifically hired to do an efficiency review as well with their software. And I'm not exactly sure. I've seen some of the analytics from that, and they did kind of indicate that there might be some efficiency there, but it all again appeared to be, well, but you got to change the bell times, or but you got to do this, and those aren't things that we can necessarily pivot as quickly as we'd like to within our organization. So, but I do think that is part of the solution, like technology and AI and route simulation and things like that are going to be part of the way forward as far as finding the best way forward to making sure that we use the resources that we do have as efficiently as possible. I do think we also have to be a little smarter in how we do things outside of those tools. How we identify children who don't require transportation. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in both boards on that. We saw it this year with the trying to identify kids who were part of the extended day programs and had childcare before and after school. I don't know where we'll eventually go with that. Again, it's not my decision in isolation, but we have talked about different ways to tackle all the parts of the problem. I think I mentioned it here in a previous meeting. It's supply and demand, right? It's making sure that we have the supply, which is the bus routes, and kind of making sure that demand is right sized to the supply as well. So there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle that will have to be looked at. And I'm sure we'll get there if we're willing to, demonstrate to the ministry where there's greater need than what they're currently funding. But also, like, we have to change the way we do business. That's what's expected. There's a reason why they rolled out this new funding formula the way they did, and they're expecting some change.
Mr. Wong, you still have the floor if you have any follow-up questions.
Perhaps also like looking at from school boards across the country of similar size or larger size, given that we have AI tools to look at their budgetary reports of what the new lessons learned or best practices that they've had for transportation and bring that to bear if you haven't done that already.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So that is probably, since I've joined this organization, been my number one resource, is reaching out to other SBOs and other consortium GMs on how they provide transportation. And in fact, we're working with some folks on standardized contracts. We've been trying to share data on how our contract rates compare with other boards of similar size, of similar geography, of similar density, population, and things like that. So we are, COSBO, which is the group of all the senior business officials, has been created a subcommittee on transportation alone. So we are working together and sharing a lot of that information. And one of the areas that we know we need to make change in because of that is our use of small vans, because we are an outlier in that area as well. It's one of the most expensive modes of transportation, and we use at least 6 times more than any other consortium in the province. So that's one of the things that have been driving up our costs. So we have to be a little bit more aggressive in that area and finding alternate ways to transport those students or graduating students to different levels of transportation once they start the program. You might start on a small van, but we have to look at ways to get you off a small van and onto a small yellow or under different environments. And I'm not sure, I've spoken with the superintendent of special education, and he recognizes the need for some change too. And so we're looking at all the different things that we can do. Because like you said, there's not going to be one big fix to this. There's going to be a lot of little fixes, 5% here, 10% there, just changing the way we do business, maybe making different decisions, and all in the interest of making sure that the students are transported in a safe and reliable way.
Good. Okay. I have no further speakers on my list. Seeing no last minute hands and nobody online, I believe that brings us to the end of this report.
No, one more
Nope,
slide.
one more. Sorry.
One more replacement costs. I did that one as well. So I think I've identified the ministry funding shortfall in this area already. So this year we have a shortfall of about $17.1 million. I am projecting that this is one of those areas where all the recent Bill 124 remedy payments and whatnot might have a negative impact on this for this organization, because this is not part of the funding formula, and this won't be part of how, or at least I don't think that, I don't have any indication that this will be, this portion that the ministry funds us will increase based on those sort of things, but there is an indirect correlation to this pressure on wages are part of it, right? So I wanted to point that out as part of the landscape of how this impacts the board. And again, from a needs perspective, there is a need for increased release time to support the strategic initiatives of this board. Replacement costs shouldn't just be for folks who are away on sick leave or other types of leave or things like that. There's things that we want to do within this organization that we need to be able to give our teachers the appropriate amount of release time to learn a new pedagogy, to learn ways to deal with students with special needs, all kinds of different things that could help the program. And the other thing is employee supports are directly tied to employee wellness. So it's important that as an organization that we recognize that to help change the trend of these expenses, that we have the appropriate wellness programs in place. And so that's why I identified wellness programs as an opportunity that are key to reducing some of these replacement costs. Professional development also reduces risk of injury and burnout. But the reality is that we're going to make marginal gains on this overall pressure, even with these programs, because the majority of it is just underfunding in the way that the province has changed the sick leave entitlement within this organization.
Okay. First on my speakers list is Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for the presentation so far. I appreciate the highlighted gaps where we're seeing struggles in both the replacement cost presentation and the previous transportation presentation. Answer some of the questions regarding needs analysis that have come to us previously. My question regarding the replacement cost slide is if, the root of some of the costing issues is, as described, a provincial funding issue, then at the board level, my understanding is that, and this question might be better situated with people, culture and people learning and culture, PCL, people, culture and leadership. Thank you. But is it that at the board level, in order to address some of these replacement cost shortfalls, is to invest in wellness and professional development programs and such to help with burnout and leave and so forth? Is that correct? And then secondly, do we have the funding to invest in those wellness programs and such for our staff?
Through you, Chair, so in the last budget that you passed, you guys actually approved an additional $400,000 in BMS training. So that's a direct example of one of the areas that we invested in. And we took a risk that the replacement costs would go down, potentially reciprocally, we weren't sure, by making that investment in reduction in workplace injuries and confidence in coming to work and not feeling as stressed, just having the tools to deal with potential dysregulation of students and things like that. And to be honest with you, Paula has probably more data on this than I do, but we have seen reduction in the number of short-term sick days that than over last year. So I think that is part of the hard work that they're doing over there and informing people what their wellness benefits are and trying to provide training in certain areas. We work with OSB on an analysis of the types of sick leave and the types of long-term injuries that members of our board do experience. And we take those suggestions and we try to find ways to implement them. Not all the fixes are expensive fixes. Sometimes it's just painting warning lines on pavement to make sure that this is a high risk of a ball strike area. So, there's lots of little things that we can do, and those are effective strategies, and we'll continue to and try to find ways to invest in the wellness programs and other types of initiatives that could reduce risks in certain areas. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think I know that Paula did a bit of a reorganization of her team with existing resources to add some strength to the wellness program in particular. And that also is probably part and parcel of why we're seeing some changes in the numbers in a positive way.
All right. Seeing no other speakers, would Trustee Nash please take the chair?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. I have two quick questions. My first question is, you mentioned that PD is going to be an additional cost if we want to come out of the same budget as replacement cost. How much PD do we want to do and at what cost?
I said, I think I identified as an area of opportunity. But again, it's not necessarily adding more money to the PD pot. We have PD pots within this organization that could address some of those needs. It's just making sure we identify the right types of PDs and opportunities available. So I don't think it's a straightforward answer to say, oh, we need $300,000 for more PD to solve this problem. I think that, again, it goes back to just making sure that we're offering the right types of PDs, the right types of opportunities. How do we offer that? Is it a podcast? Is it something web-based? I mean, there's just so much to go into that. And so there's a lot of work to be done around those kind of areas.
Okay.
Do you have a follow-up question?
I do. My second question is, what is your projected shortfall differential from the bill settlement.
Through you, Chair, I don't think we have enough information at this time to calculate that number. It's certainly on my mind.
All right, those are my two questions. Thank you.
I give you back the chair.
Amazing. Seeing no further speakers to this item, that brings us to the conclusion of your report. And I'm going to call on Director Buffoni to introduce report 24-018.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll call on our Superintendent Hall of People, Culture, and Leadership to provide our academic staffing report for the 2024-2025 school year. Thank you.
Whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, we are very happy to be here tonight to present to you a discussion report on academic staffing for the 24-25 school year. And before we get into the presentation here, I did want to recognize that to get to the table this evening, there's a tremendous amount of work by incredible people who went into that supported the development of this report. Pamela Meister is the General Manager for People, Culture, and Leadership, and has academic staffing as one of the many pieces to her portfolio that she is responsible for. And so my praise for her work and the efforts going into this report cannot be underscored enough. But in addition, I'd like to thank the academic staffing team, Diane Robertson, Emily Creech, the PCL academic staffing team managers, as well as Jen Thompson and Michael Stratford, our two staffing resource supports, and also our partners in building this report this evening. So our finance friends, General Manager Adamswaite and General Manager Ostafachuk in planning, their teams, and my colleagues who have really been thoughtful and supportive in helping to build this plan. Next. So before we dive into the specific pieces in this report, I wanted to share the principles that inform our academic staffing plan on an annual basis. So when we develop this plan, we try to align the plan with our strategic priorities and identify ways to improve student learning and well-being. We also have to align with the implementation of legislative, regulatory, and collective agreement obligations. We need to maintain our existing core services and supports provided by educators to the extent possible, and also to prioritize the services and supports to students who may be at risk, students who have traditionally been underserved by barriers in the education system, and students with the highest needs. And also we have to have consideration for the overall budget, including other staff supports that may be required to meet student needs and district priorities, as well as any other potential funding parameters. So when we're looking at academic staffing, as the trustees are all aware, we are driven by a formula for most of the academic staffing positions. So this includes school-based staff and central elementary and secondary staff and principals and vice principals. We know that this represents about 60% of our total annual budget, or approximately $621 million. The discretionary staffing component of our academic staffing plan is not directly tied to ministry funding, but it does support our current offering of programs, such as special education programs. Pam is going to take you through an overview of our current academic staffing plan. And following that, we will have the Associate Director Reynolds, Superintendent Simmons, and Executive Officer Peru to talk through the discretionary staffing components of the plan that we're presenting to you tonight.
Thank you. So on the current slide, you will see a number of steps in the OCDSB's academic staffing process. So starting back in December with our partners in the planning department, preliminary enrollment projections are being developed. And then moving into February and March, where we are tonight presenting the academic staffing plan for discussion and then for approval in March. The reason that we do approve the academic staffing plan in advance of the operating budget is that our collective agreements require us to provide schools their teacher allocations by early April. And teacher surplus deadlines as well are outlined in the elementary and secondary collective agreements for April and early May as well. So this means that staffing levels need to be approved by the end of March prior to the budget in order for us to meet our collective agreement obligations. So there are key dates established between now and June, and actually throughout the summer months, to help ensure that the staffing is completed prior to September opening for schools so that we are ready in September. Next slide, please. So this slide basically distinguishes between the required academic staffing, so the mandated staffing pieces, and that includes basic classroom teacher assignments and prep time at the elementary level, as well as some specific positions that are outlined in our collective agreement. And for elementary, we see right now, based on our enrollment projections, 2,645 full-time equivalent positions in elementary, and in secondary, 1,493.5. So those positions are formula-driven, and they're not discretionary in the sense that they are directly funded by the ministry, and the district or the board does not have the ability to make changes to those staffing allocations. The discretionary academic staffing that you see in the second line is less than 20% of the overall academic staffing. And we're looking at approximately 630 full-time equivalent for elementary and 248, almost 249 for secondary discretionary. So we'll go into further detail on the next few slides about the staff recommendations under that discretionary academic staffing bucket per se. Next slide. Thank you. So as outlined in the report and the addendum that was circulated, this is basically the detailed recommendations from staff for discretionary staffing in each of the following categories. So it can be broken down into principal and vice principal positions and special education for elementary and secondary, and central coach positions. You can see from the total, there's a modest recommended increase this year of 15.06 FTE to meet current program requirements, and totaling just under $2 million in terms of costing for each of those unique positions. So we're going to invite Associate Director Reynolds to speak to the next slide, please.
Sure, thank you, and through you, Chair. The increase that we're seeking in principals and vice principals in both elementary and secondary are to support new school openings. As you may recall, when we open a new school, we tend to appoint the principal and perhaps the vice principal, depending on the school configuration, in February prior to the new school opening. So in this year's budget, we had already approved a 0.5 principal for Stittsville Secondary and a 0.5 principal for the new Finley Creek School. We need to top those up next year when they will become full-time at those sites. And so we have to increase our principal allocations by a 1.0, 0.5 secondary and 0.5 elementary. In addition, next year, we'll be appointing a principal for the new Riverside South Secondary School, probably in February as well. So we'll need that 0.5 principal. And likewise, we'll be coming back to you next spring to seek the top up to a 1.0. Vice principal, similarly, we did release a 0.5 vice principal for Stittsville Secondary to help with the scheduling. This year, we need to top that up to 0.75. So we need another 0.25 for Stittsville. We'll need a 1.0 VP for Finley Creek when that opens in the fall with its complement of students. And then we'll also want to release a 0.5 VP in February to support the Riverside South staffing process and opening. Stittsville will have its first grade 9 group going through next year. We want a 0.83 VP secondary for Stittsville. That's more than you might need for that number of secondary students, but the school will grow quickly over the coming years, and it's very hard to support a secondary vice principal that's less than 0.83, especially when you don't have very many classes as part of their assignment have to be teaching. We're going to see a reduction in 0.5 system principals. That was, we cut it 0.5 for this year to offset the 0.5 we needed for Stittsville Secondary, and the other 0.5 can go now. Bring us to an overall increase of 0.358. The reason why there are asterisks there is if you're going through your report and looking at the table, you'll see that the number in your report is slightly higher. We've had the chance to take a second look at that, and there was some miscommunications, and we've reconciled it. So the good news is that we're able to do this with a little bit fewer positions. And this more or less is expected to align with new funding we will receive from the ministry as a result of those schools opening. New schools opening receive a per school amount for certain things such as office staff, principal, vice principal, and these fall pretty close in line with the numbers that you see in the technical papers. In some cases, a little short, like the 0.83 secondary, but that's expected to come in line pretty quickly. So that is it for recommended changes to vice principals and principals.
Okay.
I see no questions, so continue. Oh, sorry, Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Associate Director Reynolds. Vimy Ridge and Finley Creek has 2 vice principals. And I'm sure there's other schools as well that currently are overpopulated, and once the new schools are open, have you calculated that readjustment in that?
Yeah, yes, in a way. The way the staffing works for elementary VPs, for example, it's a fairly elaborate formula. Beneath this number of students, you take the ADE for the school and you you minus 250, and then you multiply by a factor of 0.003, and you get like a 0.3 VP, which you can't staff, but it all goes into the pot. So in order to put the extra VPs into that school, we kind of had to take from other places in the pot and put them there. What this will mean is, instead of just with the new school coming, we will get more funding, and we'll be able to take what we cobble together to support Vimy when we need it to, and kind of reassign it throughout the system to other schools that are in need.
Okay, Trustee Bell.
Thank you. Following Trustee Jenkins' conversation, when there are significant changes, let's say at an elementary school, over doubling in growth, and then there are special needs considerations, they might have special education classrooms as well, and you find that the needs in that school are outgrowing the single principal that's in that school. How does that get taken into account in these calculations? How is it that we ensure that the schools that we already have are adequately staffed so that we don't see burnout at the highest levels? Thanks.
So through you, Madam Chair, every year, so what I was describing is how the funding pot is assembled or allocated by the ministry based on their baseline salary. So it gives us X number of dollars to work with, and it doesn't align perfectly with what we have here in Ottawa, and it really does it with what's happening in any district. We do take the pot that allows us then to create And every year we take a look, I'll speak to elementary specifically to begin with. We take a look at our elementary schools and we assemble certain key pieces of data about each school going into the next year. What's the projected enrollment? How many kindergarten classes do we think it'll have? How many intermediate students are there? How many students have an IEP? What will the SPCs be? Is it a French immersion or English, dual track, triple track school? Where does it fall on the RAISE index? And we take a look at all those pieces, plus feedback we're receiving from the superintendent of instruction and other sources like the principal to see where we need to shift allocations. And so every year you do see some adjustments where a school might go up by a 0.5, down by a 0.5, a 0.25 move here. We don't do that, pardon the expression, willy-nilly, because at the end, there's a person attached to those positions and we don't want to be yanking people in and out of schools all the time. But that does sometimes happen as we see a school drop in enrollment and drop in complexity, and another one, maybe the enrollment's the same, but there's been a new SPC added and we're just seeing an increase in needs. We might increase the allocation there. So that is an annual review that happens as part of this whole staffing process once the overall allocation is approved.
Trustee Bell, anything further?
Just to make sure I completely understand, in this year's allocation, I guess, are we meeting the needs is the question within the allocation that we have? And what are the parameters we put in place to ensure that we are meeting those needs? I appreciated that you mentioned the RAISE index. I appreciated that you mentioned special education needs, IEPs. I'm just wondering if we had an ideal situation where we were ensuring that there was not, in fact, burnout at the highest levels. What are we looking at to ensure that it's allocated to the right place? And do we have the sufficient funding in place? Thanks.
Thanks, and through you, Chair. So that is, what would be ideal is a very complicated question and not one that, I don't think myself or others have had the opportunity to thoroughly explore. Some of the factors that are contributing to burnout among Ps and VPs or increasing their stress load certainly is, the current leave allocations and how they are used that we're hearing time and time again is very hard for them to manage. And not only just from a replacement dollars factor, but also being able to find staff to replace those that are away. There are a lot of other factors that we hear our Ps and VPs struggling with that having more Ps and VPs in the school might help them with to a certain point. I'm sure every principal would love to have a vice principal to work with, and every principal who has a vice principal would probably love to have two. That's just the way of it. More help is always appreciated. But what I can say is that we are meeting the needs as best we can with what we have, or at least we're endeavoring to do so.
Trustee Bell.
That's great. And I guess just the last follow-up question, what are those considerations that you take into account besides, especially when it comes to equity concerns? Is there anything further beyond the RAISE index, special education needs, IEPs?
Thank you, through you. So other elements of equity do not necessarily relate to need. Just because there are different identities in the building, and all of our buildings have different identities, doesn't mean that necessarily that means that more support from administration is necessary. But evidence does show that students living in low SES circumstances often do have a lot of needs that they bring to school. Students with special education needs or other ability issues do have supports that they bring to school. The other issues that I think you're alluding to, we do take into effect through those conversations that we have with SOIs and principals in turn about what is happening in the schools and what are they experiencing today that might help inform our decisions for next year. Our SOIs spend as much of their time that they can in their schools. They know their schools. They speak with their principals often. So, that is where we're going to really get at those things that aren't captured by some of the other, quantifiable pieces of data.
That's all for me. Thank you.
Amazing. Seeing no further speakers to this item, I'm going to ask Trustee Nash to once again take the chair. I have one quick question of clarification.
Yes, please go ahead with your question.
Thanks. So just to confirm, the $2 million that this is projected to cost is going to be found almost entirely from a ministry transfer payment for it being a new school?
And I certainly invite Associate Director Jarwa to intercede if he has more information. The principals, yes. The vice principals, I haven't done the exact breakdown of what they, based on projected enrollment, what they will open at versus where they may be in a year or two. But I think, if not entirely, very, very close. Those schools are all anticipated to grow as well. So I expect that they will actually fairly shortly generate more revenue than this will represent as an expense.
Okay, thanks. That was my question.
I give you back the chair.
Okay. Thank you. That takes us back to Superintendent Hull for the next slides.
Okay, through you, Chair. I will be sharing the next slide with Superintendent Simmons and General Manager Kay to speak to the recommended changes in the special education discretionary staffing complement.
Thank you very much, and Chair, through you. Also want to highlight that report 24-041 provides additional information around our specialized program class referral information, which helps to inform some of the recommendations that you see before you. That report also provides some additional details in terms of the overall recommendations coming forward from a special education perspective. I think it's important to know that the recommendations are data informed, but also reflective of trends in special education practices and research based on inclusion and equity, but also as a result of our in-district learning that we've been engaged in, that we've had some flexibility to participate in over the last little while through PPF funding. In the appendix of that report, you'll note there is a large number of students who've met criteria for placement in an ASD classroom at the elementary level. With that said, the lists are largely well managed, but autism continues to be an area where we see continued growth. So thinking back on the principles that I spoke about above, we're making recommendations for consideration as follows. At the elementary level, some of you around the table will recall that we have instituted an itinerant teacher model for ASD and DD, developmental disabilities. And we started that several years ago. A couple of years ago, we expanded that role. And we currently have 3 FTE of those itinerant teachers. We are recommending that we add an additional 3 FTE of itinerant teachers for ASD and DD. And that'll bring our total complement to 6. And what that will do is it'll allow us to provide superintendency-based support with those teachers, helping to provide programming and support strategies for students with ASD, DD being served in the regular classroom. That support also helps educators make the necessary adjustments to welcome a student into the classroom. Of course, it is still a challenge. I want to be transparent about that. But we're seeing some real success where some students, while parents and caregivers have chosen different pathways as a result of that level of support being provided. Many of you will also recall that over the years, we've added a significant number of elementary ASD specialized program classes. One of the things that we've noted is that those students tend not to leave the ASD SPCs once they've been admitted, and they are aging up through the system. And there's a group of students who are now ready to move into the 9th grade, into the secondary panel. And we're recommending the addition of 2 secondary ASD specialized program classes to accommodate those learners. Just before I turn it over to General Manager Kay, I mentioned that we've been engaged in some promising work around inclusion and appropriately supporting students who may traditionally have been supported in a general learning program or GLP class. We're excited to be recommending continued work in this area as we deepen our understanding of how to help students experience success in an inclusive setting that supports their academic, personal, and social development. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Manager Kay.
Thank you, Superintendent Simmons, and through you, Chair. From the specialized program class data that Superintendent Simmons alluded to, we have observed an increase in vacant pupil places, both in our elementary and our secondary general learning program classes. This has prompted us to recommend the closure of one elementary and one secondary GLP class and to begin the phase out of an additional intermediate class. These closures will not impact any current students in general learning program classes. We are also very encouraged with the work at 2 of our secondary sites that have supported students in regular classes following a transition from an intermediate GLP class. Through the recommendations before you, we are looking to expand this approach to an additional 3 secondary sites, providing additional options for students to access their community secondary school following a transition from an intermediate GLP class. This work provides a holistic approach to students, furthering opportunities, importantly, in those personal, social, and academic domains within their own communities. Building on this success, as well as much of the other work completed this year through priority partnership funding, we are excited to be opening the new Stittsville grade 7 to 12 site with an inclusive educational model. This will respond to the disability-related needs of students that live within this boundary. The goal is to create a culture and support structures that maximize opportunities for students, addressing all domains of their growth, and importantly, acknowledging the barriers faced by students with disabilities that are inherently built into models that are more segregated. One of the key shifts of this approach will be the staffing of both an elementary and a secondary inclusion teacher. This will be in addition to this will be included in the special education team at that site that will work towards meaningful inclusion and holistic supports to meet students' disability-related needs who live within the new school boundary.
So with a quick review of what you found in the package that has been submitted, we're happy to take some questions.
All right. I have Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I want to, you said me, right? Okay. Thank you, Chair, and through you, I want to begin by thanking Superintendent Hall, Manager LeMaster, Superintendent Simmons, Manager Kay, and Assistant Director Brett Reynolds as well for answering all the questions that we have this evening. And based on some of the conversations that have happened so far at the table, I want to continue to implore our provincial counterparts to seriously consider the concerns that have been heard tonight and other meetings to continue to enhance our well-funded education system and maintain this as a priority and a source of pride for Ontario families and their students. To my question, specifically in the report 24-041 on specialized program class referral information, there's a line about the ASD classes as, quote, no longer operationally sustainable. Could I ask for clarification as to what exactly is meant by that phrase as my first question, please, and thank you.
Chair, through you, I'll begin, and General Manager Kay may want to add at the afterwards as well. But one of the challenges we have is placing these classrooms in locations that have room to accommodate a special education class of 6 students, as well as the need to have a reasonable number of classes so that there's kind of a synergy that occurs between multiple classrooms. The other piece is this model was conceived at a time when our numbers of students with ASD was so much smaller than it is right now. And now we have core groups of students with ASD in every school in our district. Coupled with that is our ongoing growth and learning as it relates to inclusion and supporting students with special education needs in the regular classroom. So it's kind of the two pieces. One is difficulty sustaining the program as it is, but also being cognizant of inclusion and equity in supporting these students at in their community schools. The other pressure point, and you had a discussion on it earlier, was around transportation. And we are moving many children out of their community into other locations, largely on small vehicle transportation. And the associate director talked about some of the challenges of that during the earlier part. So I won't repeat what was said, but just to highlight that that is another area of concern. Thank you.
So as I understand it, with our shifting and understanding of ASD, with the shifting in the number of students diagnosed or otherwise, and then and as well the system that was created to support these students is outdated, and to propose a more inclusive perspective, we're seeing this as quote unquote no longer operationally sustainable. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And another piece in the report, we see that the new Stittsville Secondary School opened with an inclusive education model, which will embody some of those characteristics of inclusion and equity and diversity. Can I ask about data collection for this model? Will we see, I mean, it's only one FTE, I believe, and it'll be a small group, but are we taking data? Are we collecting feedback from parents of those students? Will we be scoping that program for a much larger segment of our school board? I'm asking some pretty ambitious questions, but I'm wondering if you have any answers to that just yet.
Through you, Chair, and thank you for the question, Trustee Aziz. It's definitely exciting work ahead of us. We are fortunate in many ways in that we are supported in this district. Within our own department, we have a program evaluation team. They are already beginning the work in terms of having program evaluation embedded in the opening of an inclusive education model, so it can both inform and evolve the model as we work. We will, that group of professionals works in close collaboration with our READ department, so that we are certainly capitalizing on the resources inherent with that as well. Another exciting opportunity is potentially a partnership with Queen's University, where, again, working with our program evaluators within learning support services, that we will also potentially have some students working with us to better understand the growth of this program and the effect on key domains of student learning, including those personal, social, and academic domains.
Thank you, Chair. If I can ask two more questions. First of all, that's very exciting. I sound less excited because it's a little bit later on a Tuesday, but this is very exciting. I'm wondering if I could ask that we, as trustees, receive a professional development once this program is launched in the fall, maybe later in the fall, early winter, to learn more about what this program looks like for our students, what the day in, day out looks like, just to get an idea, because for me, this is very new and exciting, and hopefully more in a more inclusive approach for our students. So I would be interested to see what that looks like in more detail later on. Of course, I understand this is work that is ongoing. My second question, and that was more of a request, I understand, but my second question is if this model for inclusive education exists in other school districts or other organizations.
Chair, through you, excuse me, through you, in relation to some professional development or some feedback loops with the trustees, absolutely that can be done. I don't want to commit to a fall timeline, given that there will be a lot of work to support the development of a new approach at New Stittsville Intermediate High School. What we don't know is what level of uptake we're going to have on that yet. So there's a lot of unknowns that we'll work through, but we'll definitely bring that back as we can. And I've forgotten your second question.
That's okay. My second question was if this model for inclusive education has been explored at other school districts or organizations.
So unsure if this specific model has been tried out in other districts, but there are other districts that have exclusively an inclusion model with no special education classes, either partially integrated or fully self-contained. So they are doing this work, whether it looks exactly like what we're promoting or prototyping at this particular time, I can't speak to that.
You're out of time. Do you want to go back on the list?
I'm okay. Thank you, Trustee Chair Lyra.
Okay, that brings us to Trustee Nash.
Yes, and thank you, and through you, Chair. Yes, Superintendent Simmons, I'm looking at the report 24-041, specifically Appendix A and by implication B, because A is for elementary and B is for secondary. As the trustee for Crystal Bay, like I'm trying to see within this table where students with the profile that we see at Crystal Bay and also at Clifford Bowie with complex multiple exceptionalities, like where would they fit in this table? Or would we see them in this table?
Chair, through you, they would be included in the DD program line as it goes across. But keep in mind that we also have semi-integrated developmental disabilities classrooms, and we also have students with developmental disabilities who are being supported in the regular program. So they're included in that, but they're not a discrete group in this chart.
Am I wrong to because I've been to Crystal Bay a number of times, and when I mean these are beautiful children. I would see them with complex special needs. And as I say, I come back to the point that they have multiple exceptionalities when I see autism, deafness, learning disabilities, and reading and so forth. So this school has a profile of learning disabilities or development disabilities, or?
Chair, yes, they have profile, the programs, Clifford Bowie and Crystal Bay are programs for students with developmental disabilities.
And then just a follow-up, I've heard from parents, and they're concerned that this is being presented at this time because they have made a number of I believe that there is a report that is to be coming out from Principal Kessler on recommendations in terms of Crystal Bay and Clifford Bowie, as well as parents have made a motion to, or an application or a request to our human rights officer in terms of the school and their needs and so forth. So presenting at this time, is that an impediment to recommendations coming from a report we haven't seen and a decision on the human rights request?
Chair, through you, one of the things that that report is coming forward in the next little while, a review of programming for students at Clifford Bowie and Crystal Bay. Any recommendations that are included in that report, we'll have to take a look at whether they'll be accepted, whether they'll be implemented, what is the timeline for implementation, and so on. So that conversation will have layers of complexity that won't be addressed in the academic staffing report.
So it won't be addressed. Is that what you said?
It's not addressed in the academics staffing report that you have currently. But any recommendations, if we are following up on them, will have to come with an implementation strategy or plan.
Thank you.
All right. Trustee Milburn.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. You previously mentioned that there's going to be 2 additional ASD classes opened. Do we know where these classes are going to be opened? And I apologize if I missed
I beg your pardon, Chair, through you. The question was, do we know where they're going to be open? Not at this point. We don't know. The analysis is still underway, and conversations have yet to be had internally on where they might be located.
Okay, perfect. And then my second question is, this chart outlines all the FTEs that are dedicated to, I'll call it special education support. But do we have numbers regarding the number of classrooms and students also being served through all of this excellent work and the numbers that might still be on the wait list for our students who are looking for different supports? That's a really large question. I know that.
So we definitely have access to some of those numbers. We know the numbers of classes, for example. We know the number of pupil spots that are in each of those classes. We know, so all of that information could be found out. It depends on what is it you're specifically looking for, and perhaps in the Q&A we could follow up with some additional information.
The Q&A sounds like an excellent place for that, so perhaps I will follow up with an email clarifying my question. Right, perfect. Thank you.
My list's growing, but I have Warner Scott Kirky. Missing anyone? No? Mr. Warner?
Thank you, Chair. Trustee Aziz actually addressed my question quite succinctly and much better than I can. Again, I'm going to throw to my alternate, Mr. Wong. He has a question about itinerants.
For the itinerants for autism spectrum disorder and developmental disabilities for teachers, how, with the increases in the number of itinerants, how are they being funded?
Through you, Chair. So the academic staffing is part of the budget process. So if you approve this academic staffing, it will be set at that amount. And then when we receive the funding, we will balance all the other budgets and then determine whether we have a little bit of room or whether we have a bit of a pressure. And then we'll have to make recommendations for adjustments outside that. So there's no new funding that we're aware of that will fund this growth in requirement, but it'll be managed as part of the overall budget recommendation to you guys.
Anything further, Mr. Wong?
No.
Okay. That takes us to Trustee Scott.
Thank you. I have to say, I'm quite excited about having an inclusion teacher at the new high school in Stittsville. However, what I would like to know is whether the intention is to have this teacher primarily serving students who otherwise would have been in the extremely good GLP class that has been at Goulburn Middle School for the last number of years, or whether it would serve a broader spectrum of students. And if there are GLP students in the area who will be staying at other schools, would they stay there? In other words, if it's an inclusion model, is that going to be a placement decision, or are there still going to be other types of placement considered?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. It will be a layered answer, Trustee Scott, and we are currently doing the work with both our central teams, the feeder schools for the new Stittsville site, as well as with the administrative team for the new Stittsville school. Right now we are presenting this as a choice for students and families. So we certainly have worked with our colleagues in the planning department to identify students that are currently in specialized program classes who do reside within the new Stittsville boundary. We're working with those school teams and beginning communication with those families to present them with this opportunity.
If they choose to continue in their specialized program class placement, that will continue to be available for them. For those students that do choose to attend their community school, our best thinking at this time is it likely would be placement in a regular class with withdrawal assistance to start, which can provide up to 50% support with a special education teacher outside of a regular class environment. And certainly it is our intention to learn and grow and explore different models about how we can be providing the best support to students. Again, recognizing that there will be some differences with respect to their academic needs, but also looking at meaningful inclusion and development to support both their personal and social domains within the school environment.
Thank you very much for that. I guess the other thing is just a shout out to the need for more itinerant autism spectrum disorder and developmental disabilities teachers. I'm really pleased to see a +3 there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. That brings us to Ms. Kirky.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Superintendent Simmons and Principal Kay. Thank you for this. I guess I have some questions. Do we know where the GLP class that is going to be closed, what school that's in?
We are still continuing with our analysis and importantly looking at the transition patterns of students currently in GLP and which classes they would be accessing. So we will have that information soon, but importantly, we have not completed all of our internal communication. So we are not in a position to share that information this evening.
Okay, thank you. Additionally, you mentioned expanding to 3 additional secondary sites, the inclusive model and the supported GLP integration. So where will those be?
Similarly, right now we are very much underway with the analysis of our current grade 8s and what their community secondary school would be for next year. And we're just beginning conversations with both the school teams at their grade 8 site, as well with students, parents, and caregivers to better understand their goals for secondary. And then once we have that information, we will look at the groupings of students to know where it does make most sense to expand that supported section approach. So we should have that information in the coming weeks. I think what's exciting about all of this work is it's built on actual students and their goals, dreams, and pathways, and then we build the structures in the places and spaces so that those community schools are prepared to welcome those students.
Thank you. And that actually segues nicely into my next question. For both for the new Stittsville School and for all of these, for the educators in all of these schools to embark on this really exciting work. And 2 of the key words in one of the reports is co-planning, co-teaching. That's really integral to this being successful. What training for the pilot schools has training and resources have been provided to the educators in those schools, and what going forward, what training and supports will be provided to ensure that educators are prepared. They want to do the best work that they can for students, and so what's the plan?
Through you, Chair, and thank you for the question. That's where we have been alluding tonight to the work that has been ongoing for the last 18 months through the Partnership and Priorities funding. So in learning support services, we have a group of inclusion teachers that are working with sites across the district to learn and support educators with inclusive practices in their classrooms. A lot of that work has been focused this year explicitly on grade 7, 8, 9, and 10 classes. So it's an incredible amount of learning and growth that has happened across the system and with the central teams. So we're going to be able to apply that learning in a very real way with the staff team that will be forming at the new Stittsville. So we will be very intentional in terms of having professional development opportunities as well as embedded learning. So through that co-teaching, co-planning model. And as I referenced earlier, in terms of the program evaluation and the planning that is going into it, there is a specific goal and objective in mind, and everything will be aligned to support the realization of that outcome. And as you very clearly articulated tonight, a key indicator of success in that regard is the support and knowledge and expertise of our teachers and our educational assistants, and supporting them in that will be kind of key to all of that happening. So it's a very intentional and strategic part of our plan.
Thank you. And if I can make a comment, that's the questions earlier about release time. That's a really good use of release time. Not a question, sorry. Last question, if I can. So the Queen's Project, that sounds very cool. Are we talking about student teachers or teacher candidates rather?
It's actually through the program evaluation program at Queen's. And so our program evaluator in LSS has, I believe, is in the process of submitting an application, and we'll hopefully hear back later this spring if this work is aligned with the goals of that program. So it would be more an augmentation of the program evaluation work in LSS, which then they engage in participatory program evaluation, which would engage in a very active way the educators and teachers at that site.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Seeing no further speakers to this item, would Trustee Nash please take the chair?
Yes, please go ahead.
So I have one question, and that is, you have asked us for about $750,000 in additional funding that we didn't have last year. Earlier tonight, we heard that we're projecting flat enrollment. Where are you recommending that we're going to find $750,000 to support these initiatives?
Through you, Chair. Some of these positions are currently PPF funded, so we're hoping that those PPFs continue on. Even though there's some growth here, we're hoping we have a funding source. There's no guarantee that the PPFs that we are targeting to transfer some of these expenses to will come in the same way that they have in the past, but we have no indication that they're going to be removing any particular PPF. So that's part of the funding source for some of this growth as well. You're right in the sense that this will be a bit of a pressure. There is a bit of a pressure here that we will have to factor in when we move forward with making a staff recommended budget, but it's part of changing the system and investing in the system. And when we talk about presenting you a budget with meeting the needs of the students, it's part of it.
If I may, a follow-up. I'm glad to hear that there are PPFs mentioned. What number of these, percentage of these, how many of these are we looking at getting for a PPF? Is it 2 or is it all 9? All 8 3/4?
Chair, I would suggest about 5 of them.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I give you back the chair.
All right. Seeing no further speakers in this item, I know that Superintendent Hall has, I think, one more slide. So we've been holding her at the table
Through you, Chair. I appreciate the conversation. It's excellent. So thank you. And the last slide that we will be talking about the recommended changes to elementary discretionary staffing. I will invite Executive Officer Peru and General Manager Owens to speak to this item.
Thank you, Superintendent Hall, and through you, Chair. As you can see, we're requesting 3 additional coaches. In the past, BNLT or Business Learning Technologies, we've had, pardon me, 6 instructional coaches. And over time, the number of positions were reduced due to financial constraints. Last year specifically, the coaches were reduced from 2 down to 1 because of financial constraints. So this 1 coach currently supports all educators across the district. The district technology plan, transforming how we learn and work, identifies priorities required around learning, seamless and innovative technologies, and privacy and security. This plan identifies additional coaching requirements to support the system in understanding, managing, and leveraging the fast-paced changes in technology in the classroom environment. So teachers continue to need support in pedagogically sound ways of leveraging the school-based technology and meeting the growing digital fluency requirements in the curriculum. So in addition to that, digital citizenship is a key area identified by senior staff where educators and students need support as there is a significant rise in cyberbullying, technology addiction, and lack of awareness overall responsible use of technology in an online environment. Generative AI has also introduced a new challenge for educators, particularly with understanding how AI can benefit and enhance student learning, but also how it can be used in an ethical, safe, and equitable manner. These coaches are also going to be leveraged for the BNLT ensuring equitable access to technology. So a lot of work's been done in the past year and will be coming to board in the future on what that equitable access plan. It's a, I don't want to call it a one-to-one plan, but it's a plan that encompasses one-to-one, but it looks at all staff and students across the system and how we can leverage technology better in the classroom. So, and finally, this is a cost neutral increase. As in BNLT, we've found some offset in operational budgets for this purpose. So I'll open it up to questions.
Trustee Scott?
Thank you. I appreciate seeing these positions here. However, I would like a clearer understanding of what the actual role will be. We described the position as a coach position. Who will the coaches be coaching? And will that coaching have the breadth to also include support for digital literacy and better abilities to process information and identify whether or not it is in fact misinformation or malinformation, as well as managing the technology, the devices themselves?
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I will pass it over to General Manager Owens to answer, but I will, so it's really to help, the coaches will be guiding teachers on, leveraging technology in the classroom. So there's another group of people that manage the actual technology, but it's the teachers, the coaches will be helping the teachers, but I'll let General Manager Owens add.
Through you, Chair, it's an excellent question, Trustee Scott. These coaches are educators themselves who have demonstrated, proficiency in using digital tools in the classroom themselves. And so what they do is they go into classrooms and it's job embedded coaching. They do demonstrated lessons for the teachers. And you're right, such things as digital literacy is one of the things, looking for example, examples of how to look at online content and discriminate as to, how can you use your critical thinking skills to determine, the validity of the content. And as with AI, this is becoming increasingly important that the students be able to use their critical thinking skills in order to determine what is an appropriate tool to use, how can I use this tool, and what is the ethical way of using this tool.
Thank you. And I'm especially happy that these are elementary positions because we need to move more of that kind of learning down into our elementary schools. Thank you.
All right. Seeing no further speakers, if Trustee Nash would take the chair.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Thank you. So my question is, this seems important, but why is it coming in academic staffing?
Because the positions are teachers, so they have to come through academic stuff.
I suppose my follow-up question is, why is there a teaching requirement associated with these positions? Why are they closed to only people with teaching criteria, qualifications?
Through you, Chair, we do have trainers in our department, and their role is to say, this is how you use the technology. In other words, click here, this is how you use the technology. These coaches, their role is to show how to leverage the technology in order to address the curricular expectations in the curriculum. So they do have to be teachers in order to understand how to teach the students with the technology.
Thank you, that clarifies.
I give you back the chair.
All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you, Superintendent Hall. That brings us to item 7, new business. I see no jumping hands, but I do have a quick thing. Our CFO mentioned that there were 3 or 4 items that had not yet come before the Budget Committee. Did we want them in any particular order? Or do you want to just entrust me to work with the CFO and the director to figure out an order? Or I'm seeing some nodding, so that's what we're going to do. Seeing no other new business, this meeting is adjourned.